Hey, everybody, welcome back to part two of this incredible historians interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I am joined today by returning guest Marvin McCrary, and today we're going to be talking about more of Marvin's background as a historian writer. And to start us off with this question, Marvin, I'm actually very keen to really hear your insights on how you found your voice as a historian writer, because I am very fascinated by that notion that as historians we're always influenced by others and how they present history. So what would you say were the books that helped you in that regard to develop your voice and structure your resources and your sources in a way that felt right to you?
Yes, I would say that there were a few historians who really stood out to me as individuals that I admired and I wanted to emulate. Like I said before, David McCullough, Barbara Tuchman, but also individuals like Alison Weir and Antonia Fraser, who are UK authors and historians of the primarily of the Tudor era and early English history that I read and followed for a number of years. And as you said, Gabriel, we read their works and we're like, okay, that really is a style that I want to adopt. But at the end of the day, we have to find our own style and our own approach. And I think the one thing I would take from the historians that I have followed, and there's so many more that I would love to mention, but one thing is that ability to again communicate what we know in a clear and relatable way, because not everybody has the classical training of the historian, or even the background, right, to that we all share. And so we really, that's a service that we can do. And while also at the same time, I'd like to stress this, while also not losing the integrity of the story that we are trying to share. You can use as much plain language as you need, but at some point the message gets lost. And so you
Mm-hmm.
want to also maintain that level of integrity as well.
Absolutely, very true. And that kind of leads me to the next set of questions, what I like to call reflective questions. And these all kind of focus on what does it mean to be an historian, especially a teacher in the digital age, because the industry has greatly changed for better or for worse, depending on how you view it. And I like asking these particular questions, Marvin, because they really make us think of this notion of, a shift in the historical discussions and the scholarship, where we are seeing new generations of historians, as you mentioned in the previous part one, about these new historians coming up and what they're learning. And I will go even a step further, where we're now seeing a rise in what I like to call not just historian bloggers or historian podcasters, but armchair historians, people who are not academically or classically trained, but still do the research, still put in the time to create engaging historical content, which at the end of the day, its sole purpose is to teach and educate, and above all, enlighten the viewers. And I've seen a lot of that over the years as a viewer myself and as a fellow historian. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on, this sort of like, I don't want to say shift or like an evolution, but it's definitely a change in a direction from you don't have to be classically trained to teach history.
Right. Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. There is this new era of historical scholarship, and historical writing is really quite awesome. I mean, at one time, you had to physically go to the archives to pull the information to do that. Now you can sit on your computer and pull it up, and a lot of it is digitized and increasingly so. But I would also say one of the maybe cautionary things that I like
Hmm.
to state is that with this new era, we need to be mindful of misinformation, right? There's
Yes,
a lot
absolutely.
out there that seems factual and it seems accurate, but unless you have that classical training or at least the ability to really discern fact from fabrication, you're going to then be presenting information that hasn't been thoroughly checked.
Hmm.
And then that, of course, can do a lot of harm because then that information is out there. It's not 100% factual. And then people read it, and we want that. But at the same time, they're getting information that isn't exactly true. And so thus you have a very skewed view of the past that it's much harder to then break down as people sort of entrench themselves on either this side or that side.
Absolutely. And sticking to this topic a little bit more, this notion of, the dangers of misinformation with history, or sometimes what's the word I'm thinking of? The retelling, quote unquote, of history to either suit a goal or agenda is also a huge disservice to the scholarship and to the historians who have dedicated their lives and their careers to this topic. And so I would just like to hear for you, Marvin, what has not so much motivated you, but disciplined you to continue teaching history, but also recognizing the changes that we've been talking about in the scholarship, how we are seeing new rises in the industry from the bloggers, the podcasters, and the armchair historians.
I think for myself, the knowledge that what we as historians and teachers and writers bring is something that is timeless and is very valuable. We need to adapt each generation that is coming up. They're less and less they have less and less of the skills that our generation had and before that. And so we have a job to curate, to help individuals really understand that even more. And I think especially now with artificial intelligence
Yes,
has its benefits as a tool, but it really should never replace the natural ability of the historian, of the writer to communicate information. I will be honest and say that I have used artificial intelligence to assist me in my research, but when I write or when I am explaining something, that is my own voice.
absolutely, 100%. And I absolutely agree. The notion of AI in history or historical writing is something that needs to be discussed, because we cannot say we are entirely against AI, because for people who don't know, uh, Grammarly or spell check or anything like that, that's also AI. So we can't say we are entirely against AI. What we can say we are strongly against the misuse of is generative AI. And you're absolutely right. Generative AI could be a tool in the sense of, if you were needing help for brainstorming, you could. But then there are also arguments saying that you shouldn't use AI for brainstorming. It's always going to be one of those things where they're never going to get a right answer either way. But I think what we can all agree upon is, when it comes to writing history and preserving history, there has to be a human behind it, because it's going to fall flat. It's not going to feel as engaging or impactful if it was written by a computer program, because that's ultimately what it would be. You would never author anything at that point. You would just be a programmer. And
Mhm.
I love talking with people about this in all fields, history included, because it does change the field, again, for better or for worse. Now, let's kind of go a little bit further and talk about probably one of my favorite set of questions, and that's of course the business side of being a historian, because not a lot of people talk about that notion. And I was wondering, Marvin, you can tell us your experiences on that topic, in a sense, like for anyone who might be pursuing a career as an historian, what are the things that they should take into account?
Yes, this is a wonderful question. I think it really dovetails into a lot of what we've been discussing about the change in historical scholarship and the challenges that technology brings. Something that I like to tell individuals is that if you have a love of history, that's a great start. You need to love the subject. You need to have a passion because that is going to continue to drive you. But same with actors and individuals in that regard. You can have the love and the passion, but you also have to pay the bills and all of
Right.
that too. So for me, right, I found that teaching was something I loved and something that I really enjoy. um as a history teacher, I, of course, am not just teaching history. I also have other jobs in that role as a teacher that I do, especially if you're a part of a school or if you are part of an institution, there's always going to be additional things that you will have to do. In terms of history generating things, uh, find there's a lot of opportunity for fact checking. This topic of AI, I have been a fact checker for some major publishing houses who have reached out to me to really, when they're about to publish a work that has to do with history, they will want somebody to review it, right? And so here I am, sitting down, reviewing this manuscript, making notes, and pointing out things that could be improved. That's something somebody would say, oh, that's something AI could do. But again, having that human element, having that individual who has that knowledge, being able to point out the inconsistencies or the lack of facts is very valuable. So I would say that yes, it's more challenging, but as long as you stay adaptable and you really broaden your field of what the historian does, because there's a lot, um, you will find something out there in the world that will help you. Mhm.
Absolutely. And this kind of goes into another question, which I think is very imperative to talk about, and it is the path of being an historian. As we talked about before, you and I are both classically trained historians. We've gone to school, we've done the research, and we both have gone down different paths. You have gone down the path of, an educator and a teacher. For me, I went down the path of being a writer. I love writing about history. I love talking about history on my show. But that was something that was a very conscious decision to make. And the reason I bring this up is that for any job in any field, like after college, we always have either two paths presented before us. We either go down the academic path and become educators, which we definitely need now more than ever, or we go down the way of the private sector where we work in government, which is also very important if you are a liberal arts major. But there's that third middle path, that third hidden path that doesn't get a lot of recognition or discussion. And the reason I bring this up, Marvin, is for me, when I was still in graduate school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea how I wanted to use my degree. I initially wanted to be a museum exhibitor at the Smithsonian, which for a long time that was my end goal. But as I was still pursuing my academics and still pursuing my studies, I realized that that wasn't right for me. I love talking about history, but that didn't feel right for me. And so we had a workshop class, and that class was about using your history degree beyond academics. And there's this one gentleman that I'll never forget. I forget his name. He was a award-winning author with a background in history. He wrote many books on the Crusades and more. And I talked with him and I talked about, how were you able to pursue this career as an author? And he pretty much said, I used my passion for history and writing and built a career off of it. And he pretty much said flat out, it wasn't easy because I was, on my own. And that got me thinking too. That's something that I want to pursue. And I'm still pursuing it even now. I've been out of school for about 4 years now and written many articles, which I absolutely love, but the journey was not easy. So ultimately, Marvin, my question to you is this. Do you feel, as an educator, that there should be a workshop class similar for students who may not just be history students, but maybe liberal arts majors, to show them that there is a way to have a career in their field beyond academics and beyond the private sector, but it should be emphasized it's not going to be very easy.
Yes. I think this is part of the wider conversation of what is the value of a college degree now.
Yes,
I think that yes, we still need people with, I mean, if we all got STEM degrees, business degrees, right, there'd really be very little diversity of thought. Liberal arts, when taught well and studied, can allow you a broad base from which you can pull a lot of ideas from. And I think that is very valuable in the workplace today, especially with our highly centralized, tech focused, at least in the Bay Area where I live, environment. You really need more thinkers like that. And so yes, I think that those types of workshops, pulling people in who in other fields, in a diverse range of fields that have a liberal arts or humanities background, but then they can also say, yes, but I also do this, can really show students the value of investing in those fields of study. It's a shame that, to just hear all the history departments and English departments and things like that are closing or struggling across the nation, across the world, really, nowadays. And I think if we had more of those types of conversations, more individuals would be interested in studying those fields. But we also need to be transparent and make sure that they understand to weigh their expectations versus their investments and just realize that it's not going to be easy, but it is possible.
absolutely very true. And I think this goes back to what we talked about in the beginning of what truly a history degree and even more so a liberal arts degree, actively entails. It is the notion of how do we present information and scholarly ideas, sorry, in a different light. Because you're absolutely right. The more science based fields are very important, but you are taught to examine in a very certain way from a certain methodology. History has several methodologies that we can use and approach scholarship, and that's what's so very important. I actively remember a colleague I had on the show who said, there was one time that historians were hired by major tech companies and other companies because they were able to read documents and very sensitive information in a way that was different from the more technical mindset because they're able to show a different side, which ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what being a historian is. It's reading the data, is culminating all of these into a singular focus and presenting it in a way that's still true to the original material, but presented in a different way, which is absolutely fine and okay. And as we near the end of this incredible discussion, Marvin, there was one final question I did want to ask you. And this could also be for any of your students that are listening to this second part right now who have listened to the first part. At the end of the day, what do you hope people might take away from our discussion, and of course, from your story as an historian, as a teacher, and as a writer?
I would hope that people take away the value that history has, not only to the individual, but also to our communities and to our countries as well. Here in the United States, we are going to be celebrating the 250th, birthday of our nation, right? And it's interesting to me how we have a lack of civic awareness and constitutional literacy. A lot of that misinformation out there as to what is the Constitution, how does it function, and maybe it's not so much misinformation, but just not being fully aware of the different aspects of that. And I think the same can be true for history in general, is that there's so much, as we've talked about, that history can provide. And it's not just simply names, dates, or facts, but the skills and the appreciation of the human experience that it can bring, and making us each aware of each other, I think is something that is timeless, and you really can't put a price tag on that.
Absolutely well said, Marvin. And a perfect ending to this incredible historian interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the second part of this incredible historian's interview here on the show. Make sure to click right up here to listen to the first part of our discussion on the show. And Marvin, before we end, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect and learn a bit more about you?
Yes, if they want to reach out and connect, I'm always open to connecting. They can find me on LinkedIn.
Nice. I'll link that down below in the description of this video. I will also tag Marvin's first appearance on the show down below with the 2 parts as well. That's probably one of my favorite episodes of season 4. And if you would like to see Marvin back on the show again for a 3rd time, you know what you have to do. Like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another amazing episode here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. A huge thank you to my good friend Marvin for coming back on the show. Wishing him all the best. And stay tuned for more announcements of upcoming guests appearing either this week or the weeks after. Make sure to follow me on my social media down below, as well as subscribe to my newsletter. Until then, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all in the next episode.